Commissioner of Connecticut's Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. She was nominated by Governor Ned Lamont to serve as the Connecticut DEP Commissioner and was confirmed in February of 2019. Katie previously served as chair of the Connecticut Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, and that's commonly known as PURA, from 2015 to 2018, and as Deputy Commissioner for Energy at Connecticut's DEP from 2012 to 2015. She also serves as the chair of the Board of Directors for the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative from 2014 to 2017. That's the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is a multi-state effort focused on reducing carbon emissions from electric generating facilities. Katie joined Connecticut DEP in March 2012 and after prior service as Deputy General Counsel for the White House Council on Environmental Quality and as a legal advisor to the General Counsel for the U.S. Department of Energy. She was a graduate of Yale College and the Yale Law School. And Katie, thank you so much for being with us. So it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Tony, and thank you to everyone who's joining this morning. I am thrilled to have the opportunity to talk with you all. It's been an exceptionally busy and challenging time for us here in the state as we address the twin challenges of the pandemic and the associated economic downturn. And I have been thinking a lot and working towards delivering on our very diverse mission here within DEEP in a way that is supportive of economic recovery for our state. And I'm really just thrilled to have this opportunity to talk with you about what we've been doing and to have the opportunity to hear from you about your thoughts on what we've been doing at DEEP and ways that we can work together and partner together going forward. It's incredibly important to us here at DEEP to have the opportunity for some direct discussion with members of the business community. And so now that, given that we can't do this in person, I think it's just incredibly helpful to use a Zoom format or the opportunity for calls like this to have more direct communication. So Tony, thank you for your leadership and for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Just kind of catching up on the last 7 months, DEEP is a merged agency. We have outdoor recreation, natural resources. We have environmental quality, over 125 different permitting programs that we oversee, as well as since 2011, having energy within our mission as well. And so I want to touch just a little bit on some of the challenges and opportunities, the things that we've been working on in each of those 3 areas. And I'll try to do it really quickly, but it has just been an incredible time. And I think first I want to start with outdoor recreation. From the moment that we learned about the impact of the pandemic and about the need to implement social distancing guidelines, one of the first questions was, what are we going to do about the parks? As people had few options for outdoor recreation and saw their lives really turned upside down in the spring, folks reacted pretty quickly by seeking out a lot of the incredible outdoor recreation opportunities that we have here in the state. And I'm very, very proud of what we were able to deliver on that front, because it's so important for tourism. It's so important for the hundreds of outdoor recreation focused businesses that we have around the state. Connecticut is uniquely blessed to have a park or state forest or an outdoor recreation opportunity within 15 minutes drive of every person in this state. And we know the multiplier effect that those outdoor recreation assets have for our economy. And, it's just been tremendous to see, as the governor highlighted, the moving vans really turning around, because I think during this pandemic, it's, I believed this even before March, but I think it's been highlighted since, the importance of having that access to the outdoors those places that people can enjoy is so critical to the quality of life that brings people and keeps people here in Connecticut and part of an incredible workforce. And so during this pandemic, while other states were closing their parks, with the governor's commitment and leadership, we kept all of our park assets open where as much as we possibly could. There were a few exceptions where we had some concerns early on around certain park features or smaller parks where we were concerned that there might not be the ability to do the social distancing, but we were able to support accessibility for the vast majority of our parks across the state. So places like Harkness Memorial and Rocky Neck and other really popular shoreline areas, as well as our inland parks, we're just seeing incredible increases in usage. I just want to share a couple of these stats. Overall, we saw throughout the pandemic, trail use in Connecticut increased by over 50% compared to 2019. And we implemented parking capacity, lower parking capacity thresholds at certain of our shoreline parks that are really popular out of concern for being able to maintain that social distance between visitors. And so we, I think folks became kind of used to that. Our parks were reaching capacity and closing 478 times this year, which was a 300% increase from normal years. But the incredible thing is, even in spite of those more frequent capacity closures, we saw an increase of 20% in park use in total number of visitors. So a place like Hammonasset that would normally see 2.2 million day use visitors in 2019 saw 2.67 million this year. So more folks were staying close to home instead of traveling for vacation to distant locations. Saw a real boost, and with great cooperation from our tourism division at DECD, we're really proud that we have these opportunities available for people here in Connecticut. And I just want to highlight for you that one of the really the policies that made it possible for us to support that level of usage and quality of service for people here in Connecticut is tied to a program. It's called the Passport to Parks program. And I'm not sure how many people are familiar with it, but I think it's really important for the business community to be aware of that program. It was instituted in 2017, and it provides for a $5 surcharge on annual vehicle registrations for Connecticut residents. And with that program, it directly funds all of our outdoor recreation programs, and it's enabled us to provide enhanced amenities and services at our state parks. And it also enabled us to eliminate parking fees for Connecticut residents at all of our state parks. And so as we think about, heading into a budget season coming up, I just think it's really important for businesses, as I see that linkage, and I hear about it all the time about how the parks are really part of contributing to quality of life for workers here in Connecticut, that folks have good awareness about the secret sauce here that makes that possible, which is the Passport to Parks program. So we're really proud of what how we delivered on outdoor recreation, and the season continues as we continue to see that park usage in outside of the beach season continuing to be very high for hiking and other types of pursuits. So that's kind of a one aspect of what we've been focusing on. I think the other, big change that we saw after March was a major shift to working remotely. And we have, for example, over 500 employees in our environmental quality branch who support all of the permitting programs, over 125 different permitting programs. And pretty much over a weekend in March, we shifted all of those folks to working remotely and working from home. And we continue to be very primarily in that posture. We've had a commitment to improving the efficiency and the transparency and the effectiveness of our permitting programs through our 20 by 20 program. And because we had implemented that program to really track certain performance goals for streamlining our environmental quality review processes prior to the pandemic, it's enabled us to really keep tabs on productivity and ensure that we're continuing to see that kind of progress as we shift out of the office and shifted to working from home. And so I've been really pleased to see how that's been working. And, earlier on in the pandemic, of course, working closely with DCD and the Reopen Committee, we were able to institute and work with industry on some quick measures to provide for more flexibility on timelines, deadlines for certain types of permit renewals or payment of fees or those types of things that were coming up when businesses were facing a lot of disruption in the early phases of reopen. And, so I think we all of the good communication that we've built up over time through various working groups, through our outreach to the chambers, and individual kind of industry roundtables that we developed, I think paid a lot of dividends in being able to work quickly with folks to provide for some flexibility and relief where it was appropriate. And of course, our work continues. And so we've been very excited, even in the midst of this pandemic, and in part because of the pandemic and the associated economic dislocation, it's caused us to sharpen our focus even further on things that we could do at DEEP to provide for a more streamlined or effective regulatory program that could actually be a spur for economic development in the state at a time that we desperately need it. And, folks talk a lot about kind of stimulus, whether it's fiscal stimulus, monetary policy, things that the Fed can do, things that Congress could do to provide relief. But improving our regulatory environment is another form of stimulus. And it's one that we've been focused on quite a bit at DEEP over these last several months. And I want to just share particularly with you one area of great progress that we have been focused on this through the summer and now going forward, which relates to our program for cleaning up contaminated sites around the state. And as folks are probably quite familiar with the Transfer Act, it is the legacy cleanup framework that was instituted in the early 80s that put a requirement on cleaning up contaminated sites at the time of transfer when we have properties that would be changing ownership. The transfer, obviously we have a strong legacy here in the state of a proud industrial past. It really has fueled our state and our economy for many decades prior to today. But it's also left a legacy of contamination that's particularly concentrated in a lot of urban areas around the state. And so the Transfer Act was kind of our first attempt a generation ago to develop a cleanup framework that could help turn those properties around, contaminated properties, and get them into productive reuse. But over time, it's proved to be really out of sync with best practice around the country. Most states, 48 other states, have what's called a release-based framework for cleanup of contamination, which is much more straightforward. It's more simple. It involves kind of setting tiered standards based on the risk that particular spill or contamination creates, and cleaning it up as you find it, cleaning it up as you go. Instead of with the Transfer Act, all of the cleanup waits until the time of sale. It really complicates a lot of transactions around the state. We heard from a lot of commercial real estate experts and folks working in that sector that it slows down transactions. It makes Connecticut a really challenging place to do business. And from the environmental side, the Transfer Act has not been delivering and actually getting contamination cleaned up and properties back to productive use. Of the 4,000 properties that have entered the Transfer Act since it was enacted, only a quarter of those have actually successfully exited the program. And so that's not good for the economy, and it's not good for the environment. And we've been focused for some time on trying to get our cleanup framework transitioned to a release-based system that is much more in line with the rest of the country and can make Connecticut a really attractive place for folks to invest in, and can be an engine of cleanups occurring around the state. So there's a couple of things. I have some great news to share in the progress that we've been making in this area. First and foremost, we have been working on a package of regulations called the Remediation Standard Regulations, as well as the environmental use restrictions that are moving forward to the Regs Review Committee as we speak. And this package of regulations is something that DEEP has developed over time that will provide for much more clarity around and more flexibility for cleanups in terms of determining certain endpoints for cleanups that are tiered to or aligned to the type of use that we expect on a property. You don't have to clean up a site that's intended for industrial use to the same level potentially as you would a site that's going to be utilized for a daycare, provided that there's enough transparency provided around that intended use and the contamination that exists on the property. And the remediation standard regulations similarly will provide for much more clarity and consistency around the cleanup standards that are required for various types of contamination. So we're really excited about that moving forward and what that will do to provide for more predictability for businesses around the state that have contamination that they need to address. And then in the special session in August, working very closely with Commissioner Lehman and DACD, we were able to secure unanimous support from both chambers of the General Assembly for a bill, a historic bill that will sunset the Transfer Act and authorizes DEEP to move forward with regulations to implement a release-based system over time. And so very, very excited about what that does. In part, that bill provided for some relief in terms of the Transfer Act as it exists today, provide for certain clarifications around the requirements there. And then it authorizes DEEP to move forward, working with a working group to develop regulations to implement the release-based framework. So it's going to take a little while to get those regulations in place, but we're committed to doing this quickly and developing these regs in a really collaborative way. So that's why I wanted to have this time to talk with you all today, because this is very important. There's a lot at stake for businesses around the state in us being able to successfully implement this new framework. I am very committed and appreciative of input that we receive from the business community about how to make these regulations workable. We are going to be announcing very soon, early next month, the process for this working group that's getting kicked off that will be developing the regulations, but we're excited to also ensure that as part of the working group process that there will be an open and accessible process for everyone, for all stakeholders that have an interest in the design of these regulations. We have great models around us. Massachusetts, for example, has a very successful release-based program. We have many licensed environmental professionals that have been working in both Connecticut and Massachusetts, for example. The LEPs provide great assistance to DEEP in being able to implement these cleanup programs successfully. We're thrilled to have that base to build on to leverage into a really successful program that is consistent and fair and predictable and efficient and can be an engine of economic growth around the state. And there's a lot, I've got a lot of great support and feedback from mayors around Connecticut as we were moving this bill forward in special session, who realize, what this will mean in terms of taking some of those long, dormant brownfields and being able to turn them around and bring them back in a productive reuse. These are sites that are located close to a lot of infrastructure, transportation, energy infrastructure, and so on. They're incredibly valuable, and I'm just thrilled that we have this kind of generational opportunity to come up with a better framework that will get these sites cleaned up. So that's one that I look forward to keeping you all posted on and having your participation in as we go forward. I'll say that we've also been quite busy on the energy front, and just a few comments there. Even in the midst of the pandemic, certainly we saw a lot of renewed focus and concern from folks about energy affordability. The Public Utilities Regulatory Authority has many different proceedings going on where they've been evaluating options to provide relief for businesses who may be challenged in terms of keeping up with energy bill payments due to the economic dislocation. If you haven't been involved in some of those peer proceedings, I do recommend folks reaching out or finding ways to follow along with those efforts. Energy affordability is something that DEEP is very committed to advancing in a number of different forums, and I just want to share a few. First off, we have first-class energy efficiency programs in our state. We're celebrating about 20 years now, 2 decades of refining and deploying these incredibly important energy efficiency programs in the state. And this is a very important time if you're thinking about ways to enhance your affordability of your business, to take advantage of these programs. That we have done a lot of work to increase the incentive levels and the percentage cap of project costs that gets covered by the energy efficiency program for a project, to really make those energy efficiency programs, which are specifically geared to commercial and industrial customers, even more accessible during this time. We've also allowed for a 6-month deferral of the start for any energy efficiency loan payback, which allows customers to see a bigger net positive cash flow from the efficiency measures right up front. And we've also allowed for partial payments to energy efficiency vendors for longer term projects, again, to help with vendor cash flow. So these are things, the energy efficiency program has just been really important for economic recovery. First and foremost, there are a lot of businesses across our state that are now employed in delivering our energy efficiency programs and our clean energy programs. And so our shift to a clean energy economy over the last 2 decades has made that a really important part of our economic vitality in the state. And at the same time, these programs are options that I recommend to you that if you haven't explored them, can help to provide some relief in terms of lower bills immediately after you install a project. And that said, we've also got our eye on the longer term. And one of the question that keeps coming is like, why do we have rates that are so high here in the state? Of course, our investments in energy efficiency mean and clean energy resources in the state mean that while we do have some of the higher electric rates relative to other states in the country, on average, electric bills and our usage here in Connecticut, it puts us more in the middle of the pack. And that's because we've really improved so much on our energy usage over time and our efficiency over time. But one of the major concerns that I have and that the governor has been focused on is that there's a real disconnect between the energy supply market that we participate in here in New England, that's administered by the ISO New England, and the that it essentially it boils down to the ISO New England market, which Connecticut relies on and has relied on for the last 2 decades since we deregulated our power sector, has not been providing the value that we need here in our state. We have experienced a lot of challenges that I think are probably quite familiar to folks in Eastern Connecticut. The ISO New England market, while the ISO identified the importance of nuclear units like the Millstone nuclear unit for maintaining the reliability of the grid, the ISO market itself, as it's been designed by the ISO, has not provided for a way to value the reliability and the zero carbon aspect of that power coming out of Millstone in a way that would prevent that facility from potentially running into economic challenges. And so that was left to the governor and to the state of Connecticut to provide for a path to retain that resource, where the ISO New England identified that without it, we would see an increased risk of grid outages, blackouts, brownouts across the region. And at the same time, the ISO New England market has really extended our over-reliance on natural gas power generation. Gas units have been built for many years across the region since we deregulated, but we do not have adequate gas pipeline capacity to provide for their reliable operation year-round. And that's contributed to some of the reliability risks that we have in the state. And then, of course, we have a mandate and requirement to decarbonize our electric grid, as 5 out of the 6 states in New England share those commitments to address climate change. So important, especially for our thinking about the size of our coastline, the amount of our insured real estate across the state that's concentrated along the coasts. Climate change is accelerating. It's driving costs and challenges across the globe, and we're already experiencing those here in Connecticut. And of course, we've put in place many programs that are helping to decarbonize our electric grid and provide for economic development. That includes historic procurement for offshore wind that we advanced last year. I'm really proud that, through the summer we saw PURA approve contracts for the Vineyard Wind project that will provide for 14% of our energy supply. That, coupled with the Revolution Wind project that will be centered with deployment out of New London, is part of going to drive not only cleaner energy, but also a significant economic development opportunity here in our state. But the challenge is that the ISO New England market, the way it's been structured, is not giving Connecticut credit for the clean energy resources that we are procuring. And it's causing us to pay duplicative costs for our clean energy supply and for the cost of the ISO New England market, which itself is struggling to value resources needed like millstone for reliability. So all of that means that, we've been advocating on the state's behalf at the ISO for a more fair and equitable set of market rules that will prevent Connecticut from having to pay for duplicative energy costs. Governor Lamont joined 4 other New England governors 2 weeks ago in a statement calling on the ISO to improve the transparency and the efficiency of their market design. And so that's something that we've been really focused on. It's kind of a wonky topic, but for commercial and industrial users, this is really important to share with you what we've been working on and hear from you any questions that you have about this effort, because we know that we cannot afford to have any duplication in our energy supply costs. But at the same time, we want to make sure that our higher energy users, we know you're competing with competitors who are in lower cost, lower rate energy states. And so really important to share what we've been doing in this advocacy to achieve cheaper, more reliable energy supply from our regional grid. So with that, I just, I will stop there. There's so much more to share about what we've been working on, but I think that's a lot and gives you a sense of how busy we've been. But to the extent that there's any time, would love to hear any feedback or questions that you have and places that we should be focused or doing more or doing better. I really value your input and especially the time to speak with you today.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. We back on, Megan? Thank you, Commissioner, for that comprehensive overview. It's obviously you've been very, very busy. So let's open the floor to, or shall I say, the screen to questions. Who would like to get started?
This is John Bash. I have a question regarding the Transfer Act for Commissioner Dykes.
Sure.
As a practitioner in this area for the past 30 years, myself and my clients have suffered through this Transfer Act for quite a long period of time. And I am extremely thankful that the DEEP and the state have made these changes. It's going to be a great switch from the transfer-based approach to the release-based approach, as you pointed out, many other states are doing. So very much looking forward to the creation of the risk-based standards. That obviously is key and critical to the whole process. My question for you is, with respect to those companies that are in the actual Transfer Act program, and those that will be for the next few years while we go through this transition, they're going to be caught in the, kind of this program that doesn't work. And I'm wondering if any thought has been given to allowing those companies to eventually transition into the risk-based program, get out of the Transfer Act either through a withdrawal process or through a transition process, so that they can then gain the benefits of the new program that you implement.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that comment. You know, I have to say it is, in some ways, it's easier to build something new than to shift us to, you know, from an existing program to a new program. And the point that you raise is just one of those that we're want to make sure that we're making those connections and linkages as we, you know, cross the bridge to a new program in a way that does not destabilize or create uncertainties for businesses across the state. You know, for projects that are, or for properties that are already in the Transfer Act, I mean, I think the general sense is, you know, that where there are transactions that have been settled around the Transfer Act, we're not seeking in the transition to the release-based program to disturb those settled arrangements. We do think that and so I mentioned the RSRs and the EURs, those two regulation packages, that just getting those regs through, which will be applicable to the existing Transfer Act regime, will provide for more clarity around cleanup requirements, as well as more flexibility in terms of being able to, with proper kind of notifications on deeds and so on and so forth, being able to provide more flexible endpoints for how to get out of the program and demonstrate that you've cleaned up to a level that is harmonized with the expected use, the anticipated use on the property. So those are things that I think will provide some relief for Transfer Act properties, and as well as some of the changes that were implemented to the Transfer Act itself as part of the special session. But I will say that you know, this is complicated stuff. It feels a little bit like you know, we're engaging in some very delicate surgery here, and that's why we don't want to we don't want to do this alone. And I think the legislature was really wise to create this working group that will be part of the design of the release-based regulations. And my intention is to ensure that that's a place for us to not only have dialogue with those who volunteer their time to be on the working group, but really to make sure that those discussions are accessible to property owners, to the public, to business groups, so that, you know, we can hear from you about what you think works best to provide for those options for folks who may be moving through the program while we're building the new release-based framework. But we're really excited about that opportunity, and I hope that that's one we'll be able to stay in close touch with you all on. There's so much at stake for the business community and for the environment as we move this forward.
Commissioner, yeah, Tony, this is Tom Vorel. Morning, Commissioner.
Morning.
I was kind of curious where the investigation is with Eversource during the summer. I live in Guilford. The Brantford-Guilford area got hit really hard. You know, it was absolute insult to injury with COVID, to be knocked out of power for 5 days and then have a rate increase on top of it. I know the governor was talking about looking at new ways to hold these energy companies accountable.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to kind of see where things stand.
Great. Well, thank you for that question. It really was this sort of incredible kind of collision of, you know, both the as you mentioned, both the issues around affordability as well as storm response, just within, you know, a month's time. So these Pura has a number of investigations that are underway. They have a grid modernization proceeding that actually started when I was at Pura and under Chairman Marissa Gillette. That has been moving forward, again, focused on modernizing the distribution grid that we all are paying for in our rates. With the rate increase that went through in the middle of the summer, I know that Pura suspended that and has been evaluating next steps there in one proceeding. The storm activity, just even while we were in the middle of the storm, we saw that the response was so inadequate. The governor submitted a request to Pura to open a docket to review the performance of the utility during that particular storm. So that process is underway, and there have been some public hearings that have been held already to date. And then we saw the special session move forward. So something that I think is really important just to share about, there's a big energy bill that passed in that special session. It had a lot of different components to it. And the question is sort of, what are you going to see? What's going to be different now with that bill moving forward? The very first provision of that bill implements something that the governor was very focused on, which is that we really have to change the way that the utility is compensated and incented if we want to see better performance from them, both in terms of affordable rates as well as better response and reliability during storms. And historically, the utility has been compensated based on a kind of a fixed rate of return that's associated with their capital investments. That made sense, 5 decades, 6 decades ago, when we were really trying to get utilities to go out and build infrastructure. But we need the utilities to perform not just in investing capital, but actually in providing faster response times, more efficient deployment of assets and restoration crews during storms, better communication. I think that was one of the major challenges that we saw. It was really disappointing that the utility, Eversource didn't have community liaisons established and communicating, with your leadership in Guilford and towns across the state, effectively to make sure that they're responding quickly to make safe and other types of issues that were coming up on the grid. So, those aren't capital investment problems. Those are operational and leadership challenges. And so, the first provision of this energy bill allows for a shift to a performance-based regulation and setting performance-based rate of return for the utility, so that they can be judged based on their delivery on a whole number of things that businesses and families across the state depend on them to do. Efficient integration of renewables, affordable rates, reliability and storm performance. There's a suite of different objectives that are identified, and now Pura is empowered to tie their ROE earning to performance of those specific objectives. If they do well, they get rewarded for that. If they do poorly, they can be penalized with a lower ROE. And so that's kind of a huge shift in terms of the utility regulation space that Pura will be implementing, going forward. There are a lot of other provisions that are in that bill. It will take some time to see these new changes reflected in utility performance and in the actual rates. But I know under the leadership of Chairman Gillette, she's someone who works with a lot of urgency. And I am confident that we'll see a lot of changes happening pretty quickly on the energy side.
And just quick follow-up. There were some comments from Eversource leadership about at some point we customers would have to pay for the storm response time. Does Pura have any power to make them not pass that along to the customers?
Yeah, so a lot of this ties back to after any storm, right? Did the utility act prudently in responding, during the storm response? To the extent that Pura determines that the utility was not prudent in the way that they allocated resources and provided for restoration, given the severity of the storm and so on. PURA has the authority to disallow recovery from ratepayers of those costs. So I think that's certainly something that PURA is going to be assessing, I would expect, in this proceeding. The bill also enhanced PURA's ability to fine the utility. It increased there was a cap on the amount, the size of a fine that could be levied by PURA against the utility. Fines like that are not recovered from ratepayers, they're recovered from the shareholders of the company. And then another kind of important aspect of the bill is that it allowed PURA to provide for restitution. This is something that was really frustrating to me when I was a commissioner at PURA, is that, whenever any of the utilities or energy service providers that we regulated, if we had like clear evidence of errors or issues that that the utility was engaged in, where they made a clear error, and we knew the account number and the dollar amount that a specific customer had been overcharged or had an issue because of that malfeasance. We had no way we could levy a fine, but we couldn't actually take the fine and then award it back to the customer who was harmed to make them whole. And so that little provision passing in this bill is going to be really important for making sure that not just that we're able to penalize bad behavior, but also that the customers who are impacted have a better chance of actually getting remunerated because of the harm that they've experienced.
Commissioner, I have a question. First of all, a comment on what you just said. As a former first selectman, every town, I'm aware of every town and city in the state, they have the best equipment, the best chainsaws, trucks, and you name it. As you go about assessing this whole issue, and it is an issue, I would really encourage state leaders to think about a better role or a more important role for the municipalities to play. I mean, obviously there are safety concerns with down wires and so on, but there is really no reason that municipalities don't play a major role in the cleanup effort. Mm-hmm. So I think I just ask that you keep that in your mind.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that was one of the things that was so concerning about the lack of communication that was occurring between municipal officials and the utilities. We learned that lesson. We should have learned that lesson. I thought we did learn that lesson in 2011 and 2012 after the major storms that occurred there. The utilities were required to have enhanced plans for again designating how to staff town EOCs with representatives and making sure that those there's one liaison from the utility per each town. And we just didn't see that occurring during the storm. And, as you think about it, I mean, heard from Eversource, well, some of the COVID guidelines are going to make this even more challenging for them to implement, the restoration. And that was extremely frustrating to hear because as all of us who've been struggling to keep things going during this pandemic understand, that the COVID was not something that was unexpected as an operating condition during the storm. It was something that the utility needed to be prepared for and prepared to overcome some of those enhanced issues. And you think about the business that was already struggling because of the challenges of reopen, now losing power, and the hairdresser or the restaurant not being open for that weekend while they waited for their storm to coming back, or losing their inventory. I mean, if there was one time that we needed to really, really do this exceptionally well, it's when our economy is already facing a challenge due to a pandemic. That's what, and so that was particularly frustrating for me to see during this experience.
My question, I guess, is, or comment perhaps, we have the Killingly power plant that's been in development for a number of years, and we're told that there's some permits still needed, and that you have something to do about that. And I wonder where you are in your thinking there. And
Sure.
this is a perfect time for, this is essentially a shovel-ready project. But the unemployment rate, as serious as it is, I wonder if that can't be moved forward post haste.
Great. Well, thanks for that question. We have a number, citing a new, or the process of developing a new natural gas power plant. Of course, a lot of attention is paid to the siting decision, but there are a number of different permits, as you mentioned, that DEEP has jurisdiction over, both air permits as well as permits related to infrastructure impacts on wetlands and water resources and so on and so forth. So there are a number of different permitting processes that are underway. Those have been continuing to work their way through the process during these last several months when we were working remotely. We are, aware of the focus and concern in terms of economic development opportunity. At the same time, that this is a facility that has garnered a lot of concern from environmental advocates and others who are focused on its compatibility with our various environmental goals around the state. But we are continuing to move those permitting processes forward at the same time that, we've been focused on as well, looking at the sort of sector, at the systemic level of to the extent that there are concerns around Connecticut being the host of a significant amount of natural gas generation. We are now a net exporter of power to the rest of the New England states. These are plants that do impact environmental quality in our state. And so, to address those concerns that we hear from folks concerned about its compatibility with our environmental policy, we have been really focused as well on the ICE New England system and why it's producing investment in resources and disproportionately hosted in Connecticut that other states have come to rely on. So those are those kinds of concerns we're working on and addressing in our integrated resource plan that will be coming out in November. But in the meantime, the permitting processes for this particular facility continue to work their way through the various proceedings at DEEP and PURA as well, I believe.
Other questions?
Good morning, Commissioner. Thank you so much for the presentation. This is Irving Steele. And one of the great things I think in the state is our natural beauty that you touched upon a little bit, and the hiking trails that we have throughout the whole state. And I know one thing that was very popular were the contests for going to all the different trails throughout the state, and that encouraged a lot more people to use the parks like you mentioned. I was wondering how you see using Connecticut's natural beauty and these trails and parks to help increase tourism, which is a great economic driver throughout Eastern Connecticut.
Yes, great question. So first and foremost, continuing to have support, not just from our forest and parks lovers and our environmental organizations, but especially from chambers and from business groups for the funding, like the Passport to Parks program that has enabled us to continue to maintain and invest in and provide great services at the parks has been huge. And look forward to any opportunities that we can work together to get that message out, as well as to let folks know your employees, to the extent that you have wellness programs and so on and so forth. We have great opportunities. First off, all Connecticut residents again can attend and come and enjoy our parks without paying for parking fees. We have the opportunity to provide for special use licenses and other things to support health and wellness events, even socially distanced, that can occur in our parks. So I think there's a great opportunity for partnership there. We've been working with the Connecticut Outdoor Retailers Association throughout the pandemic. We had bi-weekly calls with them to hear from all kinds of businesses that are supporting tourism, outdoor recreation opportunities, as well as fishing, hunting, and other types of incredibly important pastimes where people enjoy our natural resources. Throughout the pandemic, we were in regular touch with those folks, and through that we're able to work with the reopen committee as well to make sure that folks were getting guidelines that they needed to be able to support safe activity, business activity occurring in the outdoor retailer space during the pandemic. And I think that that, you know, again, maybe that will be one of the silver linings of the pandemic, is that I think it's strengthen the ties that we have between our outdoor recreation businesses and the department. And I hope that that means that even beyond, hopefully when we're able to move beyond the pandemic and some of the social distancing requirements, that we'll be able to keep up those partnerships, again, to provide for more use of our parks in creative ways, more public-private partnerships where we can provide for services and amenities the state couldn't do on our own. There's a lot of opportunity there. And I just want to share also that we just hired a gentleman named Mason Trumbull to be our new Deputy Commissioner for Environmental Conservation. Actually, he comes from a private sector background from REI, where he was doing a lot of public-private partnerships, and was also a lead with the Connecticut Outdoor Retailers Association. So I'm really thrilled about what the energy and the ideas that he's bringing from the private sector to our environmental conservation branch. And I know he's someone that would be great to connect you all with.
Other questions?
Commissioner Dykes, I have a question for you. My name is Brett Wells. First of all, I'd like to thank you for all your hard work. I'd like to thank the Chamber for hosting this conversation today. I'd like to follow up on Tony's previous question, and this is more due to spurring the economy. As you know, the effects of COVID nationally have teetered at between 15 and 8% unemployment. Connecticut kind of mirrors those numbers here. Connecticut has been a national leader in mitigating the effects of COVID and the spread of it. But one of those downturn of mitigating those effects is our economy and the state of our economy, unemployment, and jobs. We have a project out in Eastern Connecticut, Killingley Energy Center, that is good for the state, good for the environment, shovel ready with 1 million man hours. 1 million man hours recirculates economic dollars back into the local communities. As you know, which all the communities in statewide are needed, especially Eastern Connecticut. So I guess my question for you, Commissioner, is what is DEEP's role in trying to spur the economy, and what is DEEP doing to try to get good jobs for local Connecticut residents to recirculate economic dollars back into desperately needed communities? Thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you so much, Brett. Appreciate that question. As I said to Tony, we have a number of permitting processes that are moving along. This is, again, a project that I think has generated a lot of public interest. We have a lot of stakeholders that are participating in those processes. And so we are, moving those permit proceedings along. And we are doing that in a way that, again, reflects the public interest of stakeholders who've intervened and filed comments and so on and so forth. So we're moving that process through. I know that there's some decisions as well at PURA that will be needed, but certainly recognize the interest that you have in that project. Our goal, again, across the state, and not just with this particular project, we've been focused on supporting economic recovery through, in a variety of different ways. And on the energy side, when we think about energy infrastructure, part of that support also includes lots of clean energy projects and our energy efficiency programs. And so, we're sensitive to a lot of the different concerns that people have about that project. And, again, our focus is on applying the standards that we have in the way that we do for any project within our permit proceedings.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Tony, this is
I have a
John
question.
Basha again. Just a quick question for the commissioner. Now that pretty much all of us are operating probably remotely, including the DEP staff, I have a heavy reliance on using the DEP's online database to access information such as manifests, in particular when I'm trying to evaluate whether property is or is not in the Transfer Act program. It's a pretty good tool. It is incomplete in the number of manifests it has online. And I've tried to use it for other purposes as well. For example, to get kind of a listing of what are Transfer Act sites, or to access perhaps some reports. And that the database doesn't yet have that capability. And I'm hoping that the commission is continuing to move forward on supplementing and boosting the capability of online access to the information. As you are aware, trying to get phase 1 environmental reports done these days is very difficult because the consultants can't access and can't go to the DEP and pull files.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping, and maybe you can just provide some brief comments on what's being done to keep that, to boost the capability of the online resource.
So, we've been working to digitize more and more of our documents for quite some time now. And in fact, we celebrated completion of that. We prioritize digitization based on those records that we see the most folks coming to the file room to retrieve, as well as FOIA requests. And so that's where we've been able to kind of take that data around the most requested items and prioritize digitization of those. And in fact, prior to COVID, we were able to, again, this is one of the goals that we put up in our 20 by 20 program, was to advance the digitization of more files and the hazardous waste manifests. Getting those digitized and available in that online portal was a great accomplishment, and one that I'm so excited we were able to get that done before the pandemic and the switch from home, because we know that access to that information is directly tied to economic activity and people being able to move forward with transactions. So we're continuing to prioritize more high value data sets to move into the online space. It's one of those where, like a lot of streamlining efforts, it takes resources and staffing and dollars to actually implement many of those efficiency efforts. And so that's one of the things that we're really trying to look at, is how do we apply more resources to those types of streamlining efforts. But in the meantime, we're going to be continuing to identify more data sets to move online. We need to have, we have staff who have to come into the building in order to scan and digitize. So during COVID, that has presented itself another challenge. And we've also had to limit some of the access to the file room for people coming in person during COVID. But to that latter point, we are trying to make some changes in the operations of the file room to be able to provide for folks to be able to come in person in greater frequency. Through the as we're in these later phases of reopen, we're continually assessing that, and to make sure that we have the right standards in place to protect the health and safety of visitors and of our staff. But we are looking to provide for some more access there. We've also provided for folks to be able to submit requests online to our file room for retrieval and scanning to send back to folks. And that's something that we implemented during the pandemic. But we know there's a lot of demand here. I'm really acutely aware that this is a bottleneck that is directly tied to transactions and to economic activity. So, your feedback is really helpful. As we continue to spur our team on to provide for greater access, both digitally and in person.
Gabe, you had a question.
Yeah, Dan, unfortunately, I have to jump off very quickly. Offshore wind, you mentioned FERS approval of the contracts. What's DEEP's role going to be on the onshore and nearshore approval process, and how are you gearing up for that? There's, as you know, a lot of controversy around transportation impacts, fishery impacts, recreational impacts. social and environmental justice impacts. Just if you could briefly talk about how Deep's going to be involved in that.
Sure. Well, these are major infrastructure projects, and with that comes economic activity associated with deploying the projects, but also land use and other conflicts that we have to make sure that we're properly addressing. So as DEEP initiated the request for proposals for the offshore wind projects, we worked closely with the Commission on Environmental Standards that has been that convened to give us input from a whole variety of different stakeholders around the design of that request for proposals. That resulted in selection of a project that has significant components of their plan that includes mitigation and addressing both environmental impacts out offshore and impacts on commercial fisheries. We know that there's a lot of different places where these issues are going to be addressed. Not just within DEEP and in terms of, I know we're going to have some permitting decisions associated with the port development, but also up to the federal level with the Department of Interior in terms of the environmental reviews associated with the development of the lease areas off of Martha's Vineyard. So we're participating in all of those different processes. The Commission on Environmental Standards continues to meet, and it's really important. I think this is an example of where Connecticut, you get the value of that decision to merge our agency, that we are not operating in, an energy silo over here and then our fisheries program over there, but that we are regularly meeting together with both our fisheries, our coastal programs, our energy team to ensure that we have a balanced policy that is informed by expertise and engagement with stakeholders across all of those different programs.
Commissioner, this has been incredibly informative and helpful, and I think we've outworn our welcome here. I think we're beyond our time. So I want to thank you, but in doing so, I just want to extend an appreciation. I'm a contiguous property owner to Harkness State Park, and myself and a few friends walk there every morning, and the staff there do an excellent job. They really do a great job, and it's a small staff. But let me offer one suggestion. The state also owns an additional 100 acres, 96 acres to be exact, across the street. It's called the Old Vercades property. And there is a requirement that a firewall be mowed a couple of times a year around the perimeter. It would be a wonderful exercise place, walking place, if it was mowed. And I think it would really add a lot of additional space for the people who are walking today, which is great. So, Commissioner, thank you very much for everything you've done for the state and continue to do. And we appreciate all of the work of you and your staff. So thank you to our members for joining us this morning. We appreciate that as well. So have a great day, everyone.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you.